Okay, I think we'll get started. It's just 4 now. We're so pleased to see such a good turnout this late in the afternoon, so thank you all for making it over here. My name is Meg Ecclestone, and I am currently the acting head of collections at the University of Guelph, which is in Southern Ontario, Canada. Normally, I'm the collections librarian for the social sciences and business collections there. And I'm very pleased to introduce my co-presenters today. We've got Eva Jurczyk, who's the coordinator of the Humanities collection at the University of Toronto, and Monica Ward, who is head of collections strategy at the University of Ottawa. And we're all located at various points in Ontario. So our presentation today is called The Future of Print, 2 case studies in modernizing print collections. And we're going to get right into it. We've each got a case study in an initiative that each of us took on within our respective institutions. I'm going to start out by talking about what we're calling the Collections of Record Initiative at the University of Guelph. And then I'm going to hand it over to Monica and Eva, who are going to talk about the Keep It at Downsview partnership that they have spearheaded at their respective institutions. We've got a bit of reflection about the common ground between the two, the challenges and the opportunities of new print strategies, and then we will wrap up and hand it over to you all for any questions you might have. So, for my half of the presentation, I'll just start out by talking a bit about what are collections of record, because I don't know if it's a term that we entirely made up at the University of Guelph, but we might have. So no doubt many folks in the room are not familiar with what it is. And it'll become more clear once I show you an example of what one of our collections of record areas is. But for now, this is an initiative that we took on, the collections team, so the team that I'm a member of, took on starting in 2019, obviously took a huge pause for COVID when we couldn't actually access the print collection. But we were back to it beginning last year to try and modernize our print strategy. So the collections of record was a component of that work on our print collection. And basically they're our effort to create distinct subject areas of the circulating collection, so the stuff that we oversee as opposed to our colleagues in the archives and special collections, for which the library prioritizes the building and stewardship of sorry, I didn't do that. There we go. Long-term access to the comprehensive scholarly record. And the reason that this had appeal for us is because it really offered us a viable solution to the challenge of preserving scholarly materials while avoiding the overwhelming task of trying to collect everything, which is a valid way forward for certain institutions of a certain size. But I work here at this lovely concrete bunker, McLaughlin Library at the University of Guelph. Shout out to brutalism. We are, Canada has like big campuses, so we have an FTE of about 31,000 students and a collections budget of about 8 million. So Canadian, so knock off like 40% of our buying power. So we have a pretty tight staff. The collections and content team isn't huge, and we don't have endless resources to try and maintain seemingly endless historical collections of materials. Okay. So why are we doing this? Why did we pursue the collections of record effort? First, these efforts aim to ensure the preservation and long-term access to our unique research collections. So these are collections that in certain researcher circles we are known for. They are complementary to the research strengths of our institution and among the researcher community beyond the University of Guelph. And they also speak to kind of our university's not unique, but like notable heritage. We have a long history, and it speaks to those sort of disciplinary strengths. This is a local initiative, so Eva and Monica are going to share a partnership that's a little more outwardly focused among many library partners. This one is something that we were able to do in-house, sort of whole cloth, pretty independently and autonomously. However, it does position us, we wanted to be in a good place to take advantage of any future shared print strategies that might be coming down the pike. So we can imagine that this might be like a regional last copy policy that folks try to spin up across our library consortium. Any kind of coordination of print policies or print sharing strategies among our library partners. And it just allows us to make clear to our partners, our consortium partners, what we have and what we're going to take care of for the long haul. Thirdly, it allows us to weed with confidence. And in fact, this was spearheaded by an ambitious weeding strategy because the collections librarians were getting a little bit twitchy about being, overweeding. And we wanted to make sure that we were really clear on the areas that we wanted to keep for the long haul, make sure that they were safe and well preserved and around for future generations of researchers. So we are trying in fits and spurts to build towards a retention policy for all of the various areas of our print collections, but we can't quite get there until we're really clear for ourselves and everybody in the library on what we're actually going to keep, like what we're not going to weed today or hopefully ever. And then lastly, we see this as a medium-sized solution for a medium-sized school. It's like our Goldilocks solution. We're not, just a primarily undergraduate institution that's really focused on curriculum materials, nor are we like a huge research institution, such as the Universities of Toronto or Ottawa, where they've got like a med school and a huge research enterprise going on. We're kind of in the middle, and this is a solution that kind of fits that sort of right size for our medium size. And a lot of the collections of record that we have tap into our sort of unique history. So Guelph was born as a farming school, an ag school. The three founding colleges that make up the university were the Vet College, the Ag College, and Macdonald Institute, which for all intents and purposes, trained farm wives. So it was a women's college that trained women in domestic sciences and home economics and these emerging themes among women's work. And that is what makes up the backbone of our institution. And those areas, farming and food production and food supply chain and taking care of horses and cows and livestock, and how to feed a family and how to make a home, those themes still reverberate through our institution today. So Guelph markets itself as Canada's food university, much to the consternation of people who just do like criminology. Like we do offer all of the usual programs, but the branding is directed towards this theme of food. And so we wanted to be aligned with that campus heritage, and more practically, we wanted to be aligned with the stated strengths of our archives and special collections. So the collections of record that we identified are really closely aligned with the stuff that we have in our archives. So by maintaining print preservation in these sort of equivocating designated areas, we can help bolster their strengths. We can help to feed into the utility of the library as this sort of hub for these specialized areas of research. So they've got the really special stuff that can't leave, the letters and diaries and all of the other interesting and wonderful things that they have in the special collections. Whereas we have the circulating collection, which is comprised of our older materials, but is also continually being built upon with contemporary new publications that fall into these discrete subject areas. So we've been able to harmonize our policies, and I think there's an elegance in being able to optimize access. That's what we're doing with the circulating collection and preservation of our special collections. And actually, even though the subject areas are similar, because the content is really different, right? We don't have those letters and diaries. We have scholarly monographs. We also have popular monographs and cookbooks and lots of fun stuff. So the domain of the content is quite different, even if we're building thematically together. Oops. Okay, sorry. Okay, so these are the collections of record that we identified. These are the areas for which we provide, that we're going to maintain and try to retain and preserve for the long haul. I won't read them all out, but you can see they are really varied. So it's everything from Lucy Maud Montgomery, who is the writer of a beloved children's series, Anne of Green Gables. We have her whole library in our vault. So you can go in, there's like a rocking chair and a little area rug, so you can be LMM for a day if you want. All the way up to agriculture and rural studies, water, huge areas, like huge subject areas. So they really vary in terms of focus and in terms of breadth. So this is where we landed. Just for an example today, I'm going to hone in on the number 3 on the list here, which is Canadian foodways. So this is a collections of record area that I worked on. It was, I think we first started out calling it Canadian Culinaria, but as I sort of chipped away at it, honed it, got my arms around it, I landed on Canadian foodways as a title for this collection. And one of the important things I learned on this journey was what foodways means. So in case I thought it was like supply chain, like the food goes this way. It's a social sciences term that speaks to sort of like the study of the cultural, social, and economic practices relating to the production and consumption of food. Foodways often refers to the intersection of food in culture, traditions, and history. So it's like the social sciences or the studies of food, eating, feasting, feeding, making food, preparing food, serving food, all of that good stuff. So the process that we kind of settled on, like we needed a sort of a workflow, a checklist for how we were going to scope these collections. And these are the steps that we settled on. And I think I more or less literally ripped this out of our scoping documents because it really is just like a boom, boom, boom checklist of steps. So we start by trying to identify as many keywords and subdisciplines that we can. We are librarians, we work with searchable databases, and we work inside of catalogs and stuff. So we needed all of the keywords used to describe the subject area hammered out, listed. We used Gobi quite a bit to identify core titles. So we might do some web searching, find some appropriate books that seemed really core or like centrally appropriate for that particular area, for that particular collection of record, and then throw those titles into Gobi and see where they're being classed. So this is how we were able to start to identify a pretty robust collection of LC ranges that we were going to use to define which books are in and out. We cross-referenced those call numbers against ClassNet, which is, I don't know if you folks ever use that, but it's like a cataloging tool. It helps you see all of the Library of Congress subject headings and the way that items are cataloged, the call numbers, and all of their relationships therein. So we looked stuff up on ClassNet to see what the whole classification looked like, what it was called in real life. And from there, we would sort of hone down. So if you do a search for a particular LC range in Gobi and you get back like 600 titles that were profiled last year, that's probably too big. You're not going to get your arms around a collection that's that big for that single range. So we would take that as a signal to sort of chip away and refine and get the scope down to a scale that was more manageable. And we also kind of set it up so that we could make any necessary changes to our Gobi approval plans. So we identified things like non-subject parameters. Obviously for us, the geographic descriptor of Canada is a really good one that we lean on heavily, so that we could both describe the collection in a useful and meaningful way, but then take those descriptions and make any needed changes to the approval plans so that this stuff was getting into our collection automatically as much as possible. And then we would finish up by describing the collection. So the tools that we used were Gobi and our approval plans, ClassWeb, which I'm not a cataloger, but I leaned on it heavily for this exercise. We dug into the scope notes for the archival collections of record as well as really learn about these domains. Like I'm not an expert in domestic science, or Canadian foodways for that matter. So I really had to learn up on these subject areas. And then also look at our holdings as well to learn these strengths are pre-existing within our collections. So we really needed to actually learn, like, what is hanging out up there? What are our existing strengths? What do our existing print holdings look like? So just to give you a sense of how that looks for the Canadian Foodways collection, the keywords and subject headings, I didn't want to put the whole list up here because it's super boring. So I gave you this Wordle cloud instead, just to help you see the patterns in all of the keywords and all of the subject headings that we identified. It's a big chunky list. So the obvious ones are Canada Food, History Collection, but we've also got Indigenous, food justice, food trends, food systems, folk movements and folk studies, ethnic and ethnic foods, rural history, multicultural foods. So it really is a very interdisciplinary collection. It spans all manner of LC ranges. So you can see that I've got stuff coming in from the E's, from the GTs, the HD 9000 agricultural industries, as well as edible plants down in QK, some stuff from the dietetics collection, and TX, which is sort of the home range for this collection, which is called Home Economics and Nutrition. There's also a bunch of cookbooks hidden down in TX. So it's a really fun range to play around in and buy stuff in. So that's just to highlight for you how one of our collections of record can span many, many different subjects, many different floors of the library, many different LC ranges. And that was the work that we did to try to identify this as a discrete subject area. And then from there, we were able to do a bit of back buying. So we were able, through our Gobi searching and through our web searching, able to bring in, I was trying to target materials that talked about Indigenous foods, Indigenous food justice, Indigenous food practices, Indigenous food sovereignty. So we were able to get in some new titles in that area, but also I found a lot of historical titles. I actually found a lot of titles written by our faculty that we hadn't gotten in yet. So I was able to do a good purchase of Guelph published titles as well. And that's how we did it. That is now sort of the backbone of our long-term print collection. And we're hoping from here to now be able to build those retention policies so that we can start to weed out the rest of the stuff and be really clear on what we don't want to keep. So that's the COR exercise. I'm going to hand it over to Eva and Monica now to talk about Keep It at Downsview.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me? Perfect. So Monica and I are going to talk about a quite different print project, solving the same sorts of problems, figuring out how are we going to continue to collect print in a non-print environment, but working on it together as joint institutions. So briefly, what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover the barriers to doing this, why we haven't done this already, to building collaborative collections, the potential positive impacts, why we might want to do this moving forward, and suggested solutions. So the things that we did wrong and the ways that we got around those things that we did wrong as we tried to embark on this project. So a real brief context. My employment contract says that I have to show you this picture of our Fisher Library if I'm giving a conference presentation. So here's a beautiful space of the University of Toronto. The University of Toronto is Canada's largest research library. We're one of the largest academic libraries in North America, third behind only Harvard and Yale, as well as our vast electronic holdings. We still collect a lot of print, tens of thousands of titles per year, mostly or largely from the non-English speaking world. That's a lot of our collection, but we are, by far the largest collection in Canada, which actually, funny enough, makes it really hard to find partners for collaboration when you're a bigger fish than those around you. So here's a beautiful picture. Here's what I'm supposed to show you. Here's what our collection actually looks like. And this is the why. We're not under the same types of budget pressures yet as some of our partners, but we physically cannot fit more books into our stacks. We cannot. Our stack supervisor says that we have a 1 in, 1 out policy. We can't add anything else. And there's a lot of reasons for this. A big one is that we have 10% the circulation that we did 10 years ago. So our users used to store a lot of our collections for us in their backpacks and on their desks, and they don't do that anymore. And so now that those materials aren't moving, they're sitting here and on trucks and sometimes on the floor. And so it's a real crisis, the space situation for us. Luckily, we anticipated it. So here's another beautiful space. This is our Keep at Downsview shared print preservation facility, which is in Toronto, a bit north of our campus, about a 30-minute drive north. We partner with 5 other universities, 4 of them in Ontario, the University of Ottawa, Western University, McMaster University, Queen's University, and actually Memorial University in Newfoundland to fill this print preservation facility. It has been in operation since 2006. U of T started this ourselves, then quickly decided that it made sense to partner with other institutions, with other Ontario institutions, and then added Memorial. It is full, so I think there's a 6 million. Yeah, I think there's about 6 million titles in there. It's full. We're building an extension. So even this thing we've managed to fill. So again, the space crisis continues, but we do have a shared space that we and our partners draw upon. And it is meant to house low use but circulating materials. So everything in here has to circulate, but hopefully not too much or people get mad.
Yeah, so I'm from University of Ottawa, and we're also a large research library, although not as large as U of T. We have about 43,000 FTE. We are the world's largest bilingual institution, English and French. I wanted to mention also that we have a new collection development policy. So it's placing a greater emphasis on evidence-based decision-making and using different kinds of ways of explaining that the collection isn't made up just of what's on our shelf, but it includes a lot of other things. And then also a focus on increasing the diversity of our collection. And we're also moving towards the concept of collections of record, which Meg mentioned, and we were inspired by Guelph's work on that. So where we can focus our long-term stewardship on particular areas of the collection, rather than trying to collect everything in all areas and keep it forever. And so these kinds of approaches to collection development are allowing us to rely more on these kinds of shared and collaborative collections that we're going to talk about today. So a similar photo, this is what our stacks look like. We have an overcrowding issue. Until recently, we kind of didn't weed, and this is where we've landed. The books are stored on their foredge. It goes all the way to the ceiling, all the way to the floor. It's not good accessibility. It's not a good browsing experience. So this is just a bit of the context as to why we might want to share print with some of our partner institutions.
So if the problem is what, as we've described, then the solution might be, or one of the solutions might be, to begin to build collections collaboratively. And the reason that we want to do that is to enhance access for our users, but in the most cost-responsible manner possible. So we want to continue to collect print. That's important for us as libraries. In order to do that, we are going to have to do that together. We can't add costs to any of the institutions, and ideally, each of our institutions should wind up with more access to materials than we started with. So that's the idea that we're starting at. So why haven't we done that up until now? So we ran through the literature to find some of these barriers to collaboration. The first is, like I said, identifying a partner. There are data problems here. There are relationship problems. You have to figure out who to best collaborate with. The second is the very tricky seeding decision-making authority. So once you begin to collect collaboratively, you're to some extent allowing somebody else to make decisions about your library collection, and that feels weird. Harmonizing circulation policies. So even within the University of Toronto, we only recently, amongst our branches, harmonized our circulation policies because we had to. So it's convincing somebody else that they should circulate their material in the way that you want to is tough. Working across different ILSs. So actually now we're all in the same LSP, but we weren't before. And some institutions are in the same network zone. The rest of us aren't. So figuring out how to do that. And also harmonizing different metadata practices. Delivering material to users. So once you buy it together and store it together, you have to figure out, even for low-use materials, how you're going to get it back to the users when they want it. Money, establishing cost-sharing formulas. So we said that this should be at worst cost neutral, but at best have savings. But passing money back and forth through our institutions is something that we're just not set up to do. And then creating digital surrogates. So thinking towards the future, not only how do we serve out the physical materials, but how do we serve out digital versions of the materials. So these first two barriers we call the existential challenges, and we're not going to talk about these today. So we're assuming that if you are embarking on this work, you've solved this to some extent. Keep it down to you. We know we're stuck together now. Yeah. So even though for the project that we described, some of the partners aren't the most natural partners for this project, doesn't matter. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to talk about these sort of more logistical barriers. They're difficult but solvable, and they're the ones that we're going to focus on.
Yes, so we're going to turn the challenges into opportunities. So these are the three main factors we took into consideration when we were selecting the material for the pilot project. So the first is low use. So if you were thinking about this for yourself, every school or every project would need to define what they would consider low use. In our instance, the materials we were looking at, many of the schools had the items as non-circulating. So that means we didn't have circulation data. So we couldn't really base it on that. But we were able to make an educated guess, along with consulting with some of our colleagues who are more familiar with the particular material, that it's something that wouldn't circulate frequently. And honestly, for an academic library, it's sort of a safe assumption that a lot of the content isn't going to be high circulation, with the exception probably of literature, or if something's like adopted for a course, those are things that are going to circulate. So if you're looking at this, you could kind of flip it and just, rather than trying to get a perfect definition of low use, you could actually just try to make sure that you're not accidentally selecting something that's high use. There's multiple reasons that you would want to make sure that it's low use, but one is to make sure that users aren't waiting for a copy, because there's only going to be one between the shared partners. You don't want people to have to wait. And the other reason is to make sure we're not shipping a lot of things back and forth, just from an environmental point of view. And then obviously we were looking for something with a print requirement. So something where print is still needed, something that we couldn't just cancel and get the e-version of, either because it's only available in print or because the digital surrogate wouldn't be appropriate. So we looked at music, math, art, some non-English language, and other similar areas where print is still really required for that discipline, or that it's the only option that you could have. And then the other factor that we wanted to look at was selecting material with high overlap, meaning that all of the participants were already purchasing some or most of the material. That way we weren't introducing any new costs. And in fact, it will actually hopefully save us all a little bit of money, because we'll only need to retain 1 or 2 standing orders for these, and then we could cancel the other ones because the other institutions will maintain the orders for those. Yeah, so the material that we ultimately selected is a music series called Recent Researches, and where most of us already had standing orders for most of the 7 titles that are in the series. And there's only a few volumes in general per title, so it's not like a huge quantity of materials that we're going to be sharing, seeing as this is like a pilot that we want to test out. So speaking of it being a pilot, one thing that we've been mindful of is asking ourselves if our approach is scalable. So the pilot is small, it's only 7 titles, they're somewhat niche, they're kind of obscure, but an important part of the repertoire. So some of the decisions about cost sharing and delivery and data harmonization might not have a really big impact. So it would be easy to not get too worried about the details. But it's important to be mindful, because if we want to scale it to larger projects in the future, we need to make the right decisions now. So to give an example, so a solution to some of the different metadata practices across the institutions could have been to send everything to one institution who would do all of the cataloging for everyone. And that might work for 7 titles, but would that work if we started collecting hundreds or thousands of titles together? Probably not. That would be a lot of workload for one institution. We also talked about how the costs might be shared, because in the shared facility, we each pay a small amount for each volume that belongs to us there. With this number of titles, the cost is almost irrelevant because it's very small. But again, if we expand this into thousands of titles, then the decisions that we make now about how we're splitting costs actually start to be more meaningful. So as Eva mentioned, we're lucky for this pilot. Everyone uses Alma as our ILS, so that made some of the harmonization a little bit easier to do. But for the metadata, we realized that it's a series, and it seems like every institution kind of treats it a little bit differently. So, some has a single entry for the series, and all in one record, and every single thing is being cataloged separately. So we need to start doing it all in the same way. Doesn't necessarily matter how, but just that it's the same. And so we've landed on is that the library that acquires the title will catalog it, and then it will be shipped to keep at Downsview. And then the metadata will be shared with all the participating libraries. We haven't figured out yet exactly how we're going to share it, but that needs to be sorted as well. Yes, we also needed to agree to a common circulation policy. So half of the participating schools didn't circulate the materials initially. So we all had to agree that all of these materials would be circulating going forward. And for most of these, the circulation policies were largely historic. So for some institutions, it was reference material before, but there's not really a reason that it can't circulate. So everyone had to agree to make that change. So delivery of materials, that's a bit of a challenge. As we mentioned, the materials will live at the Keep It Downsview facility. And U of T, because you're not located that far away from Keep It Downsview and you make good use of it, you already have nice, smooth delivery mechanism. But for some of the other schools that are partners don't. 2 of the 6 schools have no process for fulfillment, and my institution is one of them. We do have some materials there right now, but it's all journals, so we don't really need to physically request them. If someone wants something, it can just be digitized, so we haven't figured that part out yet. But from the user's point of view, when they're looking in the catalog, the items will show as being in storage. And then when the user requests an item, sort of in the background, it goes to an ILL rota. If there's someone who's not in the partnership who has it and they're higher up in the rota, it could actually be borrowed from someone else. But it requires a little bit of a change in thinking, because ultimately it doesn't matter where the materials come from, as long as we know that we have a shared copy at the shared facility that someone can get if they need it. But if there's someone else who has it that it's easier to borrow from, it'll go to them first. So it's just a little bit of a change in the way you think about your library's collection and what belongs to you.
So costs were an interesting part of this one. Like Monica said, what we chose were 7 standing order series. So some of these series published quite heavily. They might publish, let's say, 10 volumes a year. Some might not publish a volume over several years. So we looked at everyone's existing subscriptions. A couple of the libraries subscribed across all 7 series. One of the libraries would buy individual titles but didn't subscribe. And so we just said the biggest institution is going to take the most costs, and no one is going to start, or ideally no one starts a new subscription. Everyone just makes cancellations. So one institution is holding the costs for 2 series. Everyone else is getting 1. They're invoiced directly by the publisher, so we're not having to hand money back and forth to each other. In the future, it might be nice to. We might change that process in the future, but this time, the cleanest way to do it was everyone just pays for the material they order, and after that payment is done, then it gets deposited in the shared facility. An important step too is making sure that it's noted somewhere on the purchase order line that this is a shared project. Because often when we're reviewing and making cancellation decisions, we're not looking for retention statements in the catalog records when we're thinking about prospective collection development. So every institution has to follow their local process to make notes on the purchase order line. Originally, we thought that this would be a great project to test for controlled digital lending, and then the Internet Archive versus Hachette decision happened, and we said, never mind. But what we learned from our music librarians on site was most of the time this material was used in parts. So somebody would come in, want a particular piece of music, they would make a photocopy for themselves and leave. And that's not that different from the scan and deliver service that we're already doing for journals. So we're getting a little bit of copyright advice first, because obviously a piece of music or a part of a piece of music is different from a single journal article. But once we figure that out, our idea is that we should be able to scan and deliver right from the Downsview facility. So this is one of the ways that we're actually expanding access to this material by putting it in the facility, because now everyone should just be able to request the particular piece of music that they want and get it scanned. So did we solve it? It's you know, this is, again, a very, very small scale example, but with these workflows, it seems like it will work. Even for the institutions that were purchasing everything anyway, we're expanding access because the material is circulating now, it wasn't before. We're adding scan and deliver, we didn't have that before. And everyone is paying less or the same. So it does seem like we set out the things that we achieved through collaborative collection development. And Meg is gonna wrap us up.
Okay, so just some closing thoughts, and then we've got 3 or 4 minutes for questions. So just to bring our 2 cases together, we've both been trying to pursue initiatives that are actionable and scalable solutions for academic libraries of differing sizes. Both are a part of a larger print collection strategy that we are each all trying to sort out and hammer out and move forward on. And I'll just finish with this lovely quote from a white paper from ASU called The Future of Academic Library Print Collections that says, in academic libraries, we aim to honor the print tradition and define a local print curation strategy that is meaningful and sustainable for our communities. This will serve both to preserve print literacy and to carry out the great tasks of libraries acting as custodians for all of the world's memory. So we hope we've given you some ideas on how to meet that lofty goal, and we'll hand it over to you for any questions.